Welcome, Formula One fans. This is the Formula One News Hour. I'm your host, Jonathan Steele. I guess a busy news week this week, but first, let's go ahead and thank our sponsors, as always, as we start off the show. Of course, we want to thank Thenology. All things technical, you can get them at Thenology, whether it's co-location, private cloud, public cloud, whatever your technology needs are. Please go to Thenology.com. That is Thenology.com. Excuse me. And of course, our friends at Moms for Liberty. The only organization I know of out there that's really putting a lot of effort into getting folks like you, that's right, you folks at home or wherever you're listening or watching this podcast, you need to get involved in helping get our schools back onto the straight and narrow and teach our kids things they need to learn for when they graduate from high school or college, if they go on to college. But certainly all kids need a good education to get a good start on life. They don't need to worry about what sex, gender they are, or all these other social things. They don't need to worry about that right now. They need to worry about learning things that will help them later in life. And who's pushing this? Moms for Liberty. Get involved. I found out this weekend, I was talking to the head of Moms for Liberty and found out that they have now over 300 chapters nationwide. If you've listened to my podcast before, I've been saying they got 183 or 200, but I talked to Tina and in fact, she's told me that they now have over 300 chapters nationwide. So please, get involved, get into the school boards, join Moms for Liberty, join your Parent Teachers Association, but please help Moms for Liberty help you. That's momsforliberty.org, momsforliberty.org. And of course, our friends at Give, Send, Go, the crowdfunder for all people, not just for people that they agree with politically. Like some of these crowdfunding organizations out there, the folks at Give, Send, Go, they can help you. They can help your friends. They help just about anybody, and you can go out there to GiveSendGo.com and make a contribution. Start your own crowdfunding things. Maybe you got hurt in a bad car accident. Maybe you need help with the funeral costs for a family member, or maybe even a friend, or maybe you just want to really help somebody that's having a tough time, and they've got a fund being generated out there on Give, Send, Go. So please go to GiveSendGo.com and help out. Okay, so I did not put a podcast out last week. I was going to do it on Monday of last week. But then I got rumor that there was some big news coming down. And so by the time I finished waiting for all this news to be, how would we say it, verified, then of course I thought, well, let's just leave it and do this week's podcast. This week's podcast, by the way, we are going to talk about what's going on during the week, but we're also going to talk about the first British Formula One driver, Mike Hawthorn. But first, let's get to the week's news. The big news, of course, is, yes, Lando Norris has signed up with McLaren again, and Charles Leclerc has signed up for a long-term contract with Ferrari. No, folks, that's not the big news. The big news is Lewis Hamilton is leaving Mercedes and going to Ferrari. Now, if ever there's a strange move that I can think of, this is a strange move. Leclerc just signed a long-term multi-year deal. So that means Leclerc is going to be the number one driver. So where does that leave Ferrari's number two driver right now? Does he become number three? Or Hamilton becomes number two? And what really was the driver behind this? Because Hamilton had a contract all the way through 2025 with Mercedes, so why not finish that contract? Well, so I've got some thoughts on that, right? So one is money. Apparently the deal with Ferrari is for Hamilton to make $448 million. Now, Hamilton's not going to make $448 million driving a car for Ferrari. He's just not going to do that. So what else? Apparently there's a whole other business deals and stuff like that in the works as well as for driving for Ferrari. But maybe some of the other drivers, and I'm thinking, of course, of the now number one Mercedes driver. Has he decided that they needed to make him number one driver and move Lewis on straight away, or is there something else behind the scenes going on that none of us know about? It's just really strange to me that Hamilton, I think he's been with Mercedes now for about 11 or 13 years, which and he's at his age, I think he's 39 or 40 this year, so at best he's got 1 or 2 years racing left in him. And of course, myself and Sir Jackie Stewart have come out and said that we don't believe that. Sir Jackie said he does not believe there's another world championship in it for Lewis. And I believe that because I don't believe Lewis will actually win another race. And moving from Mercedes, the number 2 in the Constructors' Championships, to Ferrari, the number 3 in the Constructors' Championships, I'm talking about 2023 here, then I don't think the Ferrari is going to give Lewis a better chance of winning races or championships. So there has to be a lot of other things going on in the background that we just don't know about. But I would say that George Russell, who is now the number 1 Mercedes driver, had a lot of influence on what is happening. I think his contract was coming up for renewal, and there's no doubt that George Russell is the driver of the future for Mercedes. He has shown great promise until he's been told by the team to slow it down a bit, so as not to make Lewis look bad. But I think that George Russell is at this point their 2 careers a much better driver than Lewis Hamilton. So the only question is going to be who is going to be the number 2 driver for Mercedes. Are we looking at Mick Schumacher return? I don't know. Mick Schumacher signed up on another series for 2024, where of course it's obvious these contracts don't mean anything because Lewis Hamilton just broke his to go to Ferrari. But in defence, there was an outlook there for both Mercedes and for Lewis to take advantage of. So Lewis decided at this point to take advantage of it. But given all that is going on, if it's not Mick Schumacher, is it young Liam Lawson, the young man that stepped in for Danny Ricciardo for half a dozen races last year and just looked amazing? I mean, he was finishing up, I think he finished in the top 10 a couple of times, but which means he earned some points both for himself and for Red Bull. Well, not Red Bull, but Red Bull's sister team, which, by the way, this year is called Stake, I believe. Stake. S-T-A-K-E. So look out for that change coming up this year. Some major sponsor has taken over ownership of the name of the team. But anyway, it used to be AlphaTauri. So it could be that we are going to see Liam Lawson. I would put my name on Liam Lawson before I would put my name on Mick Schumacher, just because, like I say, Mick signed up to race on another circuit this year, not Formula One, but a sports car circuit, I do believe. So he'll be doing like the Le Mans 24-hour race and stuff like that. So it's going to be a very interesting year, and we just got to wait to find out, because there are, at the end of 2024, I think there are 7 driver contracts up. One of which is come on, John. One of which I believe is Danny Ricciardo, but the main one being is Checo Perez. His contract is certainly up. Will Checo get another another extension to his contract. If he has a year like he did in 2023, I don't think so, because during the interview, and if you haven't watched our interview with Helmut Marko, please go out and do it. Very, very interesting guy, very, very bright, very clever. And incidentally, he's come out and said already that Danny Ricciardo is staying with Red Bull. So they want Danny Ricciardo in their fold. So that could mean that Danny Ricciardo is going to take over the number 2 spot from Checo Perez at the end of the year, this coming year, 2024. So there's going to be lots of stuff going on. So the other news is it looks like that the Andretti family will not have an independent team, will not get their own team for Formula One. But remember what I said last week, folks, actually the week before now. We are looking at the Haas team becoming the Andretti team. I firmly believe that. I just don't think Gene Haas, who he's put in there as team principal, not that this guy's a bad guy. He's a very bright guy, great engineer, and all that kind of stuff. He's just not a how do you call it? He just doesn't have that team principle. For want of a better word, swagger about him. The team principals, walk around looking and acting like they own the team. The guy that's now currently in that position certainly does not have that aurora about him. So anyway, it's going to be, like I said, it's going to be an interesting year. So anyway, let's get to the history of Formula One. Of course, we're still in the 50s, and if you remember what I said, seven of the 1950s races have already been taken up between Ascari, Farina, and Fangio. So we've got that's 7. So we've got a couple left, and so the next one coming down the pike is a guy called Mike Hawthorn. Mike Hawthorn was born on the 10th of April, 1929. And he died on January the 22nd, 1959. So he was a very young man when he died. And let's face it, there were a lot of drivers of that vintage that died young men. But he was a very, very interesting character. And like a lot of drivers from the 50s and the 60s, he grew up around cars. His father owned a Jaguar and Ferrari dealership in West Yorkshire. He was born in West Yorkshire. He went on to college, which of course was a big privilege in those days. When I grew up in England, the haves went to college, and then the have-nots like me went to tech college, and we all ended up, thanks to Maggie Thatcher. Well, if you had what's called an HNC, you ended up with a bachelor's degree. They converted all of those, but for the most part, the haves went to college, and the have-nots went to tech college. And what's interesting is Hawthorn, after he got out of college, he then went and did an apprenticeship at one of the car manufacturing places. So an interesting start to his life. And here's another interesting thing about him. He got into racing in 1950, and like others around him, if you listen to the podcast, a couple of cars were really popular back then to start racing careers in them, and Mike was no different, and that was the Riley. The Riley was at the time was an independent car manufacturer. It went on to become part of the British Leyland conglomerate that came out in the 60s and went all the way through into the middle 70s when Maggie Thatcher sold off all of those different divisions and cars like the Hillman and stuff like that are no more. Triumph is no more. So a few of the brands are no more. A few of them were bought up. Land Rover was bought up by BMW and then sold off, and then bought by Ford and sold off, and the same with Jaguar. So some of the brands were bought and sold many times. Aston Martin, there's a manufacturer that's kind of been bought and sold a few times. The one that comes to mind that's had a pretty stable ownership and for years has had a waiting list for its cars. For those of you who might be hearing this name for the first time, go look it up. It's a car company called Morgan. The Morgan boasts hand built still today. They don't put out that many cars every year, but they've got 2-3 year waiting list for their cars. So anyway, Mike Hawthorn entered his little Riley into a race and won it. So the very first race that he entered, he won. He entered a number of other races. This is in 1950. He entered a few other races that year, and the lowest position that he finished was fourth. So you got the kind of impression the minute you start reading about Mike Hawthorn and looking at his career. He was a natural driver. He was very, very good. Remember, this guy's racing against the likes of Fangio and Ascari and Farina, all these guys, the very best. Sterling Moss, who came in the 50s, who was a Formula One world champion in the 60s, and towards the end of the 50s, of course, Graham Hill. And then into the early 60s, of course, Mike didn't make it into the early 60s. Then you had Jim Clark and those guys. But so he won his maiden entry into racing. And of course, another thing to note here is, of course, they're starting off. And Riley was a saloon car that people converted, just like your family car over here, and they turned it over. They turned them into rally cars and stuff like that for racing. Excuse me, my allergies are bothering me a little bit. So then, in 1951, he continued to drive for Riley, and he also started driving in Formula One for the guys at Cooper. Cooper, I can't remember the second of it, but that's a name that you'll have heard from my previous podcast. The Cooper, which the Mini Cooper, that's named after the Cooper family, which was very big into racing in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. Just a very famous racing family, kind of like the Andretti family over here in the United States. So he moved up in class. He was driving a Riley TT, which had a 1.5-liter engine. So that's quite a large car, actually. And actually, that car, if I remember it rightly, because I remember these cars well, they were around, when I was a kid. So the Riley TT, if I remember rightly, was also, you could get it as a convertible. So whether his was convertible or not, I don't know. So in 1952, he switched to open seating race cars and won his very first. You got it right. This guy enters a different car class. He entered a Formula 2 race, his very first one, and won it. And that was a Cooper that he was driving in that race and won it. And then later on in that year, he went on and started driving for Ferrari. And it turns out for most of his career, Ferrari was his favorite car, although he did move around. He drove Maseratis. He actually, his father died, I think, in 1954. And when his father died, he left him the family garage, right? So he was thinking, well, I need to drop out of Ferrari based in Italy, and I'll need to go to work for drive for a Formula One team here in the UK. So he went to drive for a team called Van Wall, which was a local team actually there in Yorkshire. That's where he was born, in Yorkshire, which is kind of central England. If you look at a lot of the drivers came from Scotland or from the south of England. Not very many came out of the Yorkshire area, although the Yorkshires always had 2 or 3 pretty decent racetracks for racing. The very famous one is at Redcar. And if you ever drive from London to Newcastle, you'll pass Redcar. It's right, there's a US Army base just a few miles south of there. So anyway, he did very well. He in that 1953, which now would be his second year in Formula One. as he didn't really start driving Formula One until the end of 51. So he really started driving full-time Formula One for Ferrari in 52, and he would get his first podium finish that year, and none other, of course, than the British Grand Prix, and which earned him a place in the championship, third place in the Formula One World Championship. So not a bad showing for a guy that barely in it a little over a year to come in third place. And sorry, I keep looking down at my notes here. Anyway, from 53, he like I say, he raced full time for Ferrari. And then in 1954, he kind of had a change of direction and decided that he wanted to try something different. So what he did was he focused on sports car racing and entered the Le Mans 24-hour race. And yeah, you guessed it, he won. This guy's amazing, or was amazing. It looks like just about every new chapter, every new thing that came into his life, he won it. And so he gave up his position with Ferrari, and then went on into the sports car racing for 54. And the big event, of course, was he won the 1954 Le Mans. Now, if you look up the history of Le Mans and motor racing in general, that Le Mans race is famous, sadly, for one or two things. One or two drivers were killed in that race, but also 84 spectators. And some blame Mike Hawthorn as the reason that the accident that killed the drivers and the spectators, by the way that he overtook someone going into a turn. Afterwards, the inquest, they said no, it was just a racing accident. But there's always those guys that was, oh no, it was his fault. But anyway, it was a tragic year for motor racing that year, and Le Mans, it's still, when you talk to people that know a lot about the Le Mans 24-hour race and motor racing in general, like I say, it is the one crash that stands out of all the crashes. Now, there have been other races where car crashes have killed spectators. In fact, in Formula One, I can't remember the exact location, I'll look it up, but in Formula One there was about 6 or 8 spectators killed at another race. And in fact, I think it was Switzerland that banned Formula One racing until it got its act together and got some serious safety stuff put in place. I think it was like 2002 it was banned through that year. So anyway, in 1954, Mike joins, because this is the year his, sorry, 50, sorry, I'm missing one. It was in 1955, he also focused his time and efforts on the sports car racing and trying to balance between running his garage that he'd inherited and motor racing. And so in 1956 and 57, then Mike went to drive for the British car company BRM, which was British Racing Motors. And BRM is famous for one thing. They are the first guys to have done two things. They're the first thing is, you'll have heard of the paint color British Racing Green, which became very famous for Lotus. Lotus cars, all their cars were painted in the early days British Racing Green. Well, BRM was kind of the first one that introduced that shade of green. The other thing BRM did was they were the first ones to race a V16 engine in a Formula One car. And although it was very powerful and it could beat any car on the straightaway, its problem was reliability. And in fact, it was so unreliable that Mike Hawthorn, midway through his contract with them in 56, 57, he left BRM, and he left them for that, for one, because the car was totally unreliable, but also he left them because he really just didn't get along with the management of the company. And of course, you know, the cars were so dangerous back then. And remember, these cars, you know, we haven't added that much speed in the last 50 years. These cars are doing 170, 180 miles an hour. If you look at today, you know, we're doing 220. So we're doing 40 miles an hour faster. So we're really doing speeds in those cars. They should have been limited to about 100, 120. That's what they should have done to make them really a lot safer. But let's face it, if you crash at 100, 120 into a brick wall, or 200 or 180, you're still going to die pretty fast. So I don't know whether that logic makes much sense. But the cars, of course, were not safe, and they were very, quote unquote, unreliable. So anyway, after Mike left BRM, he went back to his old buddies at Ferrari. And so it was in 1958. So now we got 8 drivers of the 50s, 8 Formula One champions. In 1958, Mike won the Formula One World Championship. Now here's something really weird, and it's only been done one time since. He won the World Championship by 1 point by defeating another side story I'll tell you in a second. But he won it by 1 point, and he only won one race. And the only reason that he won was because at the Monza Grand Prix in Italy, or was Monza Monaco at the Grand Prix, the stewards disqualified him because his engine died. And so what he did was he pushed it around, and so he used a hill, and he pushed it down the hill, but it was going the opposite way. So it was going into traffic to bump start his engine again. He got that going, and he ended up coming in second. But the steward said, no, we're going to disqualify you from doing that. Now, Sterling Moss went in and said, listen, that's just not fair. The guy got his car going, he got back up to speed, and he actually passed Sterling Moss again en route to coming in second. And if Sterling Moss had not gone to bat for him for that, he would never have been Formula One world champion. And I would have said never have been. We'll never know the answer to that one. But at the end of the 1958 year, he retired from racing altogether. He just hung it up. I'm Formula One world champion. It's time for me to end. So at the end of 1958, that was the end of Mike Hawthorn's racing career. Sadly, Mike wouldn't go on to live much longer. He died in a car accident. He had a Jaguar Mark II. Look that one up, folks. If you say it was as they say, a completely reworked Jaguar Mark II. So he probably had it dry sumped. He probably had a light flywheel put in there. He probably shaved the cylinder head. Probably upped the compression ratio, up to 10 to 1 or something like that, and whipped off the SU carburetors and put on Weber carburetors, all the things that guys used to do to soup them up back then. And he and a guy called Rob Walker Racing, Rob was driving a Mercedes 300 SL. Who wouldn't love to have one of those cars? But anyway, they were racing. Mike overtook Rob, and then right before they were going into a corner, so he actually probably outbraked Rob and overtook him. But he clipped the curb line, lost control of the car, hit a tree, and died. There was a lot of people speculated that they had been racing, and of course Rob Walker at the time said no, that didn't happen. But later on in life, it did happen. And the other thing I just remembered, I have to tell you, who's the only other Formula One race car driver to win a world championship and only win one Formula One race that year? It was 1982. It was Keke Rosberg. So anyway, the other sad part for Mike Hawthorn, he died early, yes, but he was going to die anyway. He'd already lost one kidney to disease and his other one was failing him fast. And in fact, doctors at the time had surmised that he only had about 3 years left to live. So probably better off the way that he died than dying from kidney disease. Although, of course, kidney disease, any of these diseases like cancer, I'm a cancer survivor. If you get cancer, they always say it's a great disease to die from because you get a chance to say goodbye to your family and friends and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if that's true. I'm a cancer survivor, so hopefully I'm not going to experience that. It's been 10 years since I was diagnosed with cancer and then cured. So who knows? Now, before we finally say goodbye, we're going to add a public service announcement and then a really great announcement. So the public service announcement is, folks, dementia is I think 1 in 3 of us. Hopefully I won't be one, you won't be one. But dementia is a big, big problem in our society today, throughout the United States, throughout the world. Dementia, I guess they used to say when I was a kid, they used to say, well, she just doesn't know who she is anymore. And we didn't really have a name and it really wasn't out there. But folks, I want you to go to raceagainstdementia.com and make a donation. Raceagainstdementia.com. Now then, why all of a sudden have I brought up Race Against Dementia? Well, this week we're going to interview Sir Jackie Stewart. And for those of you who don't know, Sir Jackie's wife, Helen, and guys, he's been married to this woman for like 67, let's see, he's 80, in his middle 80s, so certainly he's been married to her for 60 years. Can you imagine how many famous guys that get married today and stay married for that long? This is an amazing couple. And Sir Jackie is an amazing guy. And he started this organization, Race Against Dementia, to help, bring awareness to it, but then also get money to help see if we can't find a cure for it. There's all kinds of drugs and stuff out there now that is helping it, but it's going to be too late for Helen. She needs around the clock care. It's also too late for my mother-in-law, who is also a dementia sufferer. So tune in next weekend, because next weekend it will be an interview with Sir Jackie Stewart. And of course, we want to say thank you to Andre Kuhn, our all technical, all producer, all everything guy that kind of hopefully makes this podcast sound good, look good, and all those other things. So thank you, Andre, for everything that you do. And folks, we will see you next weekend. Thank you very much and have a great week. This is Jonathan Steele saying goodbye.